Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to everyone on the screen. Good to see you guys. Doug will be teaching today, and this is one of my favorite stories. We continue to go through the life of Jesus. We continue to be blessed every week by what we are learning for the second time as we go through this. I don't think we have any visitors here today, do we? No, I don't see anybody a visitor. So I won't go through the routine about what kind of class we have. This is a discussion class. Please raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment, and keep your comment brief. We've got a lot of people here, a lot of people on Zoom, and we want to hear from all of you. So please comment. Please keep them brief. We want to hear from you. And with that said, John, you have our prayer.
Father, thank you for a beautiful fall day. Okay. Thank you again for bringing us all together. Be with those that could not make it. As we approach this holiday season, help us not forget that this is also a gift from you. Our families, our friends, what a blessing. Take the words that we have today, work through Doug to inspire us to realize our purpose through you. In your name, amen.
Well, it is really good to be with you. Keith, good to see you in person in class. Just really good to see everybody. Duane and Mary, good to see you. Somehow I miss seeing you. I don't know if it's you or me, but good to see you. And we are in the Harmony of the Gospels, number 64. Number 64. And this is, again, one of the stories that all the synoptics tell. So Matthew, Mark, Luke tell it. And if you have a harmony, it will be helpful because we're going to be using all the different accounts. If you don't have a harmony, we'll get you one. But if you'd still rather use your own Bible, we're in Matthew 8, Mark 5, and Luke 8. Matthew 8, Mark 5, and Luke 8. And of course, the way the harmony does this is it lays those out on the same page side by side. One of the things that each of us who teaches this class, the usuals, of course, are Ken and John and me, is we look at the story and we realize that there is so much here. It is like looking at an amazing landscape. And we say, in the short time that we have together, there's no way that we can look at all the details of this landscape. And I know that each of us who prepare to lead this discussion, pray and ask God to guide us to those things that will be most helpful to the people who are here today. And I have done that. And we're really only going to look at three basic ideas today. And those three basic ideas are going to be three things that Jesus is. Three things that Jesus is as revealed in this story. And of course, by looking at those three things that Jesus is, we're going to miss many of the other details in the story. Now, we'll probably look at them here and there, but by looking at these three things that Jesus is, I hope that we see something in this story that's not only new and fresh to you, but that will be practical and helpful for you right now, today. So the way I'm going to start us today is actually having you look in the text. And I've picked these all from Luke, largely because Luke is on the right-hand side of the page and it's easy for you to write in that margin. And I'm going to ask you, if you want to circle three words and to write three words in your margin. And so if you're looking on page 77 of your harmony, this is from the account of Luke 8. If you look down the page about halfway in verse 32 there, Luke 8:32, you'll see the word pigs. It says a large herd of pigs was feeding there. Circle the word pigs. And next to it, out in the margin, write the word edgy. Write the word edgy, E-D-G-Y, edgy. Because one of the things that Jesus is that we see in this story is edgy. And we'll talk about that. That's actually the last thing that we'll talk about. But I'm having you circle it first because it occurs first on the page. Now turn the page over to page 78. And you'll see again from the account in Luke 8. And this time in verse 35, way up at the top there, it says, the man was sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. Circle the word dressed. Circle the word dressed. And out in the margin there, write the word compassionate. Compassionate. Something that Jesus is, and that we see in this story, is compassionate. And then there's one more word, and it's a little bit lower than halfway on the page. It's down in verse 39 of Luke 8. Down in verse 39 of Luke 8 is the phrase, sent him away, saying, return home. It's there in verse 39. Sent him away, saying, return home. Circle the word return. Circle the word return. And out in the margin, put the word strategic. Strategic. And so three things that Jesus is, he's many things, but three things that we're going to observe in this story is that Jesus is edgy, compassionate, and strategic. And actually the order that we'll take them in, I'm going to share my screen with you now, and I'll share my screen off and on with you here. Let's see if we can make this work easily. Did that work?
Work.
Wonderful. Okay, so here you have these three words, and this is the order in which we're going to take them. You've already got them circled in the story. Compassionate, strategic, and edgy. And as you can tell, there's more to come. We're going to be filling in this chart as we go, and I'm happy to send this PowerPoint to Ken, and he can send it out to all of you with the video of the class today. So don't worry if you don't get it all down, but you might find this as a helpful way to organize what we're going to study in this lesson today. That Jesus is compassionate, Jesus is strategic, and Jesus is edgy. So I'll stop sharing my screen. We'll come back to this in a minute. But right now, let's read the story. And I'm going to do as I've done before, reading the bold print, which isn't as bold as I like. There's my little grumble. And we're going to read the story from the three different synoptics down the page. And it starts in Luke 8, but then it moves into Mark 5 and Matthew. And of course, the way that it's arranged on the page with the bold print, you can just see all the various details of the story put together in one story. Now, let me acknowledge one thing right up front, and this is about all we're going to say about this, is that I realize that in Matthew 8, it mentions 2 demon-possessed men. In Mark 5, it only mentions 1, and in Luke 8, it only mentions 1. And people have puzzled about this and said, is this the same story? Did Mark and Luke miss the fact that there were 2 men? Or, why is it 2 in one place and 1 in another? Because the story, other than that, seems identical. And we're not going to go into that today. There are a lot of scholarly hypotheses on this, none of which are totally satisfying. And for the purposes of our class today, I'm acknowledging it, but we're not going to go into it. And I want you to pay attention to the other aspects of the story. If you're interested, sometime I'd be glad to discuss with you some of my thoughts on that, but it's really not relevant for our study today. So with that, let's jump into the story and read it, starting with Luke 8, and then we'll move our way through the bold print of the story. They sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs, so violent that no one could pass that way. And many times the demons had seized him and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot and kept under guard. But he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet, and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you evil spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many," because many demons had gone into him. "Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" they cried. And they begged Jesus again and again not to order them to go out of the area into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on a nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "If you drive us out, send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the evil spirits came out of the man and went into the pigs. The whole herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off into the town and reported all this in the town and countryside, and the people went to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons, from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured, and told about the pigs as well. Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes began to plead with Jesus to leave their region, because they were overcome with fear. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed, from whom the demons had gone out, begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but sent him away, saying, "Return home to your family and tell how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell all over the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. So let's just let this story kind of simmer for a moment. Let's just take it in. Ken mentioned at the beginning of class that this is one of his favorite stories. It's one of mine too. One of the very first sermons that I preached was on this passage from the account in Mark. I still have the notes to that sermon somewhere. It's been a favorite story of mine from a long time, from the time I was a kid. And there's interesting stuff about it. Let me just get some overall reactions to the story, and I'll ask you a couple of questions, and then we're going to dig a little bit deeper. And we're going to look at Jesus in this story as compassionate and strategic and edgy. But let's first just take in the story as a whole. So what do you like about this story? Ken, I'm going to pick on you since you said this was a favorite story of yours. What do you like about it?
Well, it's just like an action-packed movie. I mean,
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, a lot of action here. We'll come back to that in a minute. Somebody else, what do you like about this story?
Restoration.
The restoration. The fact that there's restoration here. Yeah, I saw a hand here. Yes, please. Please.
What caught my attention was he said, "What is your name?" I couldn't help make me think of, the third of the angels that were convinced that they should leave, go with Satan. And I think he was wondering which of his friends that he knew personally was
wow.
that. And so I was just kind of wondering what was going through Jesus's heart and his mind.
Yeah.
Which of his best friends, former best friends, was the one doing that.
What an interesting perspective. That's the reason I love showing up for this class. I always hear and learn something new. Thank you. Somebody else. What do you like about this story?
Demonstrates his power.
Yeah. Demonstrates his power. What else? What else do you like about this story?
Go ahead, Roy. You're muted.
Roy, you're muted.
It tells us that no matter what our past has been, God can accept us.
Amen. Amen. No matter what our past has been, God can accept us. Anybody else, either online or in the room? What do you like about this story?
Jasmine, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Jamie?
Oh, this is Jamie's husband.
Okay,
So,
hi.
Hey,
Please.
I like the fact that he's crossing the sea and he's talking to the Gentiles and spreading the good word to them and including him in his message.
Yes. We're going to come back to that too. Good. Anybody else? What do you like about this story? Please, Gordon.
Well, one thing that kind of caught my attention was the fact that this man, unlike so many of the cripples that had sought Jesus' help, he didn't seek anything. Jesus reached out to him.
Yeah.
I think it's very strategic.
It is, and we're going to come back to that too. Excellent. I think I saw another hand. Please, over on the other side.
I think it shows the great master teacher. He teaches by asking questions.
Yes. Oh, great observations. Let's see. Anybody else? Did I miss anybody else? Okay, let me ask one other question that we'll just give, again, a big picture here. Is there anything about this story that troubles you or puzzles you? Anything that troubles you or puzzles you?
Yes. The people wanted Jesus to leave because they were afraid, but it was such a wonderful miracle. Why wouldn't they want him to stay and do more miracles?
Yeah. Why did they drive Jesus away? Yeah, good question. We'll talk a little bit about that more. Somebody else. What puzzles you or what questions does it bring to mind? Please.
I think maybe they drove Jesus away because they weren't willing to give up bacon.
Okay, there's actually more truth to that than you might know. So we'll come back to that too. Anybody else? Anything that troubles you or puzzles you about this story?
Is that meat or money, bacon?
Well, right.
Okay, let's not go too far down that rabbit hole now. We will come back to it though. You notice I had you circle the word pig, so you know we're coming back to the pigs. Anybody else?
Go ahead, Stacey.
Please.
What's interesting is that the demon came running to Jesus and he was afraid that he was going to be tortured. So you would think he would just run the other direction. And it kind of makes me think that Jesus drew him to him, whether he wanted to come or not.
Yeah. Yes. Interesting. That whole dynamic of running to Jesus, but being afraid of Jesus. John, did I see you were about to make a comment? No. Okay. Did I miss any comments? Anybody online? Yes, one more comment.
Again, when the demon went to Jesus, it said, "Are you here to torture me before the appointed time?" So the demons recognize Jesus, but the people don't. And the demons recognize that Jesus has an appointed time, that there is a script that he's following.
I'm glad you caught that little detail. It's an important detail. It's not one that we're going to delve into, but it is a very significant detail in the story. Okay, so if I didn't miss anybody's hands, I'm going to move forward. And here's where I'd like us to move. I would like us to first consider how this story is a story that tells us of Jesus' compassion. What is Jesus? He's compassionate. Now that's a pretty obvious one, and we're going to play it out though just a little bit and maybe see some things here that you hadn't noticed before. First, let me tie together the story that comes just before this and then this story. The story that comes just before this is the one we studied last week, and if you turn back a page you'll see that story number 63 is the calming of the storm. And then this one comes, the healing of the demoniac. And in all the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, Luke, they're all told they're paired. These two stories are paired and in this order. And I think there's good reason for that, not just in the way that the evangelists were telling the story, but in the way that it happened. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I want you to remember that the key point from last week is that Jesus was asleep in the boat and they woke him up saying, "Don't you care that we're drowning?" And Jesus wakes up and calms the storm. And he says, "Where was your faith?" And we walked around that last week and we saw a number of beautiful things. One of which is in the middle of all this chaos, Jesus had this incredible compassion for them, even when they were blaming him, when they were thinking that he had abandoned them, when they were throwing these things at him, these accusations, didn't faze Jesus. And he calmed the storm and dealt with their fear. Now, the very next thing that happens is they make their way across the lake, now on very calm water, and they land at the other side. They're going across the northern tip of the Sea of Galilee, and they are traveling, as some of you have noticed, from a primarily Jewish area on the west bank to a primarily Gentile area on the east bank. And they are traveling across. If you look on the map, you'll see that this is kind of the northeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And it was primarily a Gentile area. And it's interesting. You remember when Jesus said that they were going to get into the boat? He said, "Let us get into the boat and go across to the other side of the lake." And so they all knew that they were heading into Gentile territory. And it's not that much different than when Jesus was traveling from Jerusalem to Capernaum back in about a year before, during his first year of ministry. And it said he had to go through Samaria. No, he didn't have to go through Samaria. In fact, most people didn't go through Samaria. They went around Samaria. But Jesus had an appointment there with the woman at the well. She didn't know it, but he did. And I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. But Jesus knew he had an appointment with a man on the other side. And as you see in the story, he goes over, he meets this guy, the people tell him to leave, and he leaves. That's the only thing really that he does there. That's the reason they went across the lake. That's the reason that they endured the storm. Now, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So let's come back to this idea of Jesus being compassionate. I want you to see what happens here. And I ask you to circle, what word did I ask you to circle? And to put the word compassionate next to it? Dressed. I ask you to circle the word dressed. Notice at the end of the story here, the man from whom the demons had gone was sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. And just stop and think about it. He was dressed and he was in his right mind. Sometimes we even use the term, a person is clothed with their right mind. And so there's an interesting coupling of ideas here. This man had been naked and now he's dressed. This man had been out of his mind and now he's in his right mind. And just to remind you, look back at the description again at the beginning of Luke 8. It says, when Jesus stepped ashore, I'm in verse 27, when Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs, so violent that no one could pass that way. Many times the demons had seized him, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot and kept under guard, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. And then down in Mark's account in verse 5, it says, night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. This is some miserable guy. He's naked. He is covered with cuts, some of them very fresh, others of them probably infected and oozing, others of them scabbed over. Very likely his hair is long and matted. He's dirty and filthy. He probably looks more like some sort of a wild animal than a human being. I'm sure that his nails had grown long. He was naked. And he had chains dangling from him that with superhuman strength, he had ripped apart. I mean, just get the picture of who this guy is. And Ken, when you said there's a lot of drama here, I could just see Hollywood going wild with the special effects with this guy. And what they had experienced less than, a handful of hours before with the storm on the lake was in some ways nothing compared to this guy coming charging at them. Gordon?
When I think about that, it seems to me that if he, even with superhuman strength, were to break the chains, it would have damaged him seriously. So I can't think of this in any other way, but that the demons broke the chains.
Yep. No, you're right. In the same way that most demon possession, and we're not going to go down that trail either, but that's an interesting trail. Most demon possession has with it elements that are certainly superhuman. Often the voice is changed. Oftentimes the person has strength that they wouldn't have otherwise. And we sometimes roll our eyes at this idea of demon possession. We say, really, it was just some sort of mental illness or something. And it's true that there's possibly some explanation for that in some cases, but demon possession is very real. And those that have lived in some other countries have seen it firsthand. Occasionally we see it in this country. I have been involved only a couple of times with a case where there was some demon possession, and it's scary because there is a face-to-face confrontation with the powers of evil in a very naked way. And I believe it's a real thing. Just as God is real, I believe that the devil is real. And just as God can work supernaturally in people's lives, I believe the devil can work supernaturally in people's lives. Yes, please.
Oftentimes there's a different smell.
Yep.
A different smell.
Yep, a different smell, a foul odor. Yeah. So it's something that I don't wish on anybody to have to ever experience this. And it's not something that we see a lot in this country. And I think there's some interesting reasons for that, but it is more common in some other places. So let's come back. Oh, please. Yes, please, Janet.
So as I think of this story and I think of Jesus' compassion, one of the things that I think about is what you talked about is he had one reason for going over there. Sometimes we look at people who we may think of as being controlled by the devil, maybe not possessed, but controlled by the devil, and they're out of reach, at least to us as human beings. And this man, when he saw Jesus, I believe under his own power, he ran to Jesus, because even in his state, the demons inside of him recognized that they didn't want to be anywhere around Jesus, but this man wanted to be near Jesus. And when he opened his mouth to speak, he couldn't say, save me. But the demons started speaking. But Jesus recognized, because he is God, that this man did all he could to get to Jesus.
Beautiful perspective.
Passion, he brought him to the place where he was now in his right mind. And the other thing is that sometimes God allows us to go through a fearful event to teach us who he is, because of what we're going to go through. He's preparing us for what we're going to go through. I think Jesus was like, and you're still afraid after you saw what I did? Nobody can keep up with this noise. Also, Satan is very wise, and he answered to Jesus, I'm legions. There's legions of us in here. time I think the other word legion being used was when Jesus said to Peter, who's like cutting off the man's ear in the bar. He's
okay,
like,
Jana, hold it there. You're going real far here, and good thoughts. I want to rein us back in though, but thank you. Good thoughts. Okay, and I'm also watching our time. We've got a lot of material to cover, even though we boiled it down to 3 things. But let me bring us back to the compassion here. I'm just wanting to focus you on this simple thing of this man and what he was like. This guy was bruised, bleeding, naked, chains hanging off him. He was a mess. Any way you want to picture it, he is a mess. And of course, we could take this into our own lives being a mess, et cetera, et cetera. But look at the end of the story. Come again back to where you circled the word dressed. There's a lot being said here. Luke 8, he was dressed, sitting at Jesus' feet. This guy is calmly sitting there at Jesus' feet. It's almost like the picture of Mary sitting at Jesus' feet when Martha, her sister, is trying to get her to help with dinner. He's sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. In other words, completely the opposite of what he'd been just minutes before. Completely the opposite. And the key word, hang on, Gordon, I'm not taking your hand right now. The key word I want you to see here is dressed. And I'm going to share my screen with you again. And I want to just remind you of some stories that, let's see here. If I can make this work. Nope, that's not working. That's not working. Oh, here we go. Okay. That should work. There we go. Let me just remind you of some stories when people have been naked and ashamed, and then they've been dressed. And all of this is being called to mind here. Think of Adam and Eve on the day that they were confronted by God for eating the forbidden fruit. And they're hiding because they're naked and ashamed. And what does God do? Go back and read the very end of Genesis 3. It says that God dressed them in skins. He clothed them. Or you think of the prodigal son whose fine, fancy clothes had all worn out. And now he was feeding pigs. And he comes home still smelling of the pigsty. And his father, the first thing he does is he wraps a robe around him. He dresses him. The story of Joshua in Zechariah chapter 3 is not as familiar, but you can go back and read it. It's a vision that Zechariah has of Joshua the high priest in filthy garments. And what does God do? He dresses him and he puts fine garments on him. And on throughout Scripture. Isaiah 61 is another example of this, where God says, I'm going to dress you in the most beautiful clothing. And we use the expression of the robe of righteousness, etc. It is a metaphor, and here it's reality, that when God is taking us from what we have been and the mess that we have been to what he can make us, he dresses us and he puts us in our right mind. And nothing in this story, I think, quite captures the compassion of Jesus as dressing this guy, putting him in his right mind. And Jesus shows his compassion, but it goes a step farther. And let me just take you forward here. And that is everything that is wrong with this guy, his nakedness, Jesus takes on that. On the cross, Jesus is stripped buck naked. And Jesus takes on what we have been so that we can be what he is. The aloneness. This guy is alone out there in the tombs. Jesus takes on that aloneness. Everybody runs away from him. And even he feels this forsakenness of the Father when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus takes on the aloneness. And this guy's aloneness is healed by the fact that Jesus will take on that aloneness. The being cut by stones, even very literally, the flogging of Jesus was by little stones embedded in that whip that they used to flog him. the wounds, the bleeding of Jesus on the cross. Jesus takes that on himself so that he can heal somebody whose life is wounded and bleeding and raw. And on it goes. The fact that he's in the tombs, Jesus goes to the tombs to take on what we have had with living death, and he gives us the life that is his. Isaiah 53 is probably my favorite passage that tells us that Jesus takes on himself everything that he takes away from us, he takes on himself. And let me just remind you of how it reads here in verse 4, Isaiah 53. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. And by his wounds, we are healed. I don't know if it would be better if I quit sharing my screen with you. Maybe it would be. Here, I'll quit sharing my screen with you there. I'm in Isaiah 53 still, and verse 5. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. You know, it's a beautiful thing to see Jesus showing compassion to this man. It's a beautiful thing to see that Jesus clothes this man and puts him in his right mind. But do you realize what it cost Jesus to do that? It meant that Jesus became naked so that we could become clothed. It meant that Jesus became wounded so that we could become healed. It meant that Jesus became pierced because of our transgressions so that we could experience the wholeness that only he can give us. And this story tells of an extreme case of a man who needed Jesus' compassion. And at the end of the story, the man is clothed and in his right mind. Why? Because Jesus was willing to be stripped naked and almost driven out of his mind in order to go to the cross for us. In Gethsemane, he's crying out, my God, is there any other way? It's as if Jesus is at the edge of his rope, at the end of his rope, crying out. And the way that we experience the healing of Jesus is because he's been willing to take it on himself. Read all of Isaiah 53. I just read a few verses, but later this afternoon, read the whole chapter. It just beautifully, probably better than any place in the Bible, describes how our healing and our wholeness is because Jesus was willing to become wounded and broken for us. Well, let me share my screen for one last column here before we go on to Jesus' strategicness. Come back to sharing my screen here. So, Jesus takes our wounds to give us his health. And the question I'd like you to ask yourself is, how do I experience the compassion of Jesus today? How do I experience the compassion of Jesus today? Are you aware of your nakedness? Are you aware of your woundedness? Are you aware that while you may not be in quite the same shape as this guy, at some points in your life, maybe you have been, or maybe you will be. And Jesus takes those wounds on himself so that he can give you his wholeness and his clothing. Where did that robe come from? Probably from Jesus. Was it Jesus' extra robe? Did he give him his outer robe? Was it from one of the disciples? It certainly came from Jesus and his band. And Jesus clothes this man and puts him in his right mind. Abner saying, close your next slide so we can see the text better. Oh, okay. I don't know how to do that, Abner. I must be sharing with you. Close my next slide.
Yeah, on our monitor, that side is eating up part of the resolution.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
I think it's probably at the bottom of your.
There.
Nope.
How's that? Nope.
Well, I believe it's the icons at the bottom.
One of the icons at the bottom. Tell you what, I'll just close the whole thing here, and we'll go back to no slide, and I'll see if I can figure this out when I'm not teaching. Are we back to no slide?
Sure.
Okay. Hey, let's move on. We've only got a few minutes to talk about Jesus being strategic here. So go back to the story and look at the word that I had you circle when it says strategic, where it says return home. So you're in Luke 8 and verse 39, where he says, return home. Now, pause and just puzzle about this for a minute. This guy asks a very reasonable request. He says, can I go with you? And Jesus says, no, you got to go back home. Now stop and think about what he was going home to. Here, the whole town was saying, Jesus, get out of here. We don't want you here. And Jesus says, I would like you to go to this place where I'm so unwelcome. I'd like you to go into this hostile crowd. They don't want me. And people are pretty upset about the loss of these 2,000 pigs. That's hurt the economy in town. Would you just go back into this town where everybody is so hostile? That's a tough ask. And okay, same message from Abner again. I thought maybe somebody was texting or commented. That's a tough ask, but there's something incredibly strategic about this. And I want you to notice again what's going on here. We talked about the geography of this a minute ago. And let me now bring you into both the geography and the chronology. This story is happening just a little over a year before the cross. It's happening in the fall, so it's about this time of year. It's in the fall, probably getting close to the Feast of Tabernacles, which was like the Thanksgiving season. It was a harvest festival. And Jesus is wrapping up his Galilean ministry. You remember he spent his first year down in Jerusalem and Judea. And now his second year, he's spending up in Galilee. And as he gets toward the end of his Galilean ministry, the second year of ministry up in the north, his popularity is growing and growing. And Jesus is making a couple of forays outside of the area of Galilee itself. Here's a case in point. He goes across the lake to the Gentile area, the Gentile side, the wrong side of the tracks, if you please, to the east side of the lake, where it's largely non-Jews, where it's largely Gentiles, hence all the pigs being raised. You wouldn't find a herd of 2,000 pigs on the west side of the lake. You'd only find that on the east side of the lake, where it's more Gentile than Jews. And Jesus is incredibly strategic here because in a few months, he is going to come back. And I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but just track with me for a second. Jesus is going to close the Galilean ministry with the feeding of the 5,000. That's going to be on the west side of the lake, and it's going to be all Jews. But a few weeks after feeding the 5,000 on the Jewish west side of the lake, he's going to feed the 4,000 on the Gentile east side of the lake. Do you see where I'm going with this? Track with me 1 second longer. We know how the crowd of the 5,000 gathered on the Jewish west side of the lake, because Jesus had spent most of the year over there doing miracles. How did the crowd of the 4,000 gather on the east side of the lake several months later? There's only one explanation. Jesus visits that side of the lake once, and it's right here, before he feeds the 4,000. And what he leaves behind is one or two men, depending on the account. He leaves behind one or two men and says, go home and talk to your family and friends. And he comes back a few months later, and what's the result? Now just let this sink in for a second. This is impressive. He comes back a few months later, and the result is over 4,000 people come out to see him. The last time that Jesus had been there, one town had said, get out of here. We don't want you. You're bad for business. And into that hostile environment, Jesus sends a couple of formerly demon-possessed men. He said, would you go home and talk to your friends? And he comes back a few months later, and there are thousands of people who have heard about Jesus, and they all turn out to see him. And again, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves here because we haven't studied that story yet. But just read how this story goes. Here it says, verse 39, return home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis. The word Decapolis means what? 10 cities. Deca is 10, polis is city, and there were 10 cities in that region. These guys went beyond what Jesus asked them to do. They didn't just go home to their immediate family unless they had a lot of family. They went through that whole region to those whole 10 cities. So the man went away and began to tell all over the Decapolis how much Jesus had done, and all the people were amazed. And the story is paused at that point. And we don't come back to it for several months. It's going to be after the feeding of the 5,000, which is the next Passover in the spring. And it's going to be a few weeks after that, that again, Jesus says, let's go across the river, across the lake. And they show up again at this same region. And this is when thousands of people, and Jesus now feeds 4,000 Gentiles, whereas a few weeks before he fed 5,000 Jews. Now, I'm doing a lot of monologuing here, but I want you to see something about Jesus being strategic. Let me share my screen with you again, and I'll see if I can make this work better. Let's see here. How's that? Is that any better, Abner?
Yep.
Good. There we go. Okay. So you tell me if it gets messed up. So if you think of Jesus, the woman at the well, we mentioned that a minute ago. Jesus was incredibly strategic. He met one woman at one well, but then he ended up staying there in that town for 3 days, 2 or 3 days, and the whole town became believers. Same sort of a story. Jesus was strategic. Yes, he was compassionate to that one woman, but by his command to her, go call your husband, he ended up reaching the whole town. And by Jesus' command to this man, return home, he ended up reaching that whole region. Jesus was making a strategic command to one individual who then reached many, many others. Or think of the invalid at the pool. We're going back to a story that we studied earlier. Jesus gives one command to this one man very strategically. He says, pick up your mat and walk. If Jesus had not commanded him to pick up his mat and walk, a very strategic action and a strategic command, Jesus would not have gotten into that whole discussion with his enemies that ended up, sadly, with him kicking him out of town, but also brought things to a head. And again, I'm just referring to stories that we've studied in the past. This is from John chapter 5. Or think about Lazarus. Again, a story we haven't studied yet, but we're jumping ahead. When Jesus says, Lazarus, come forth, come out of the tomb, he gives a command to Lazarus, and he's working strategically because he knows that by raising Lazarus from the dead, who's been in the tomb for 4 days already, he is going to seal his own death sentence, but he's going to push things toward the cross. Jesus is doing strategically for one individual something that is going to affect many others. And I'm sorry, I'm rushing here just a little bit. But I want you to see that while Jesus is being incredibly compassionate to the individual, he's also being strategic, looking at the bigger picture and how other people are going to be affected. And here what he's doing is affecting that whole region. Okay, I have a comment online here. What a graphic lesson of God's love and patience. He doesn't leave us at our first pushback against him. He works around it and still strives to save us, as demonstrated in the very first rebellion at the beginning of Adam and Eve. Yep, lots of parallels here. Let me just finish this column here of being strategic. If you think of what Jesus said later in his life, remember all through the book of John, Jesus has this phrase, my time is not yet, my time is not yet. It's what he said to Mary when she said, would you do something about this lack of wine at the wedding? And she said, no, my time is not yet. Here in John chapter 7 and verse 6, Jesus says to his brothers who didn't believe in him, get on down there to Jerusalem. And Jesus said, verse 6 of John 6 or John 7, the right time for you has not yet come. I'm sorry, I misread that. The right time for me has not yet come. For you, any time is right. When Jesus says to his brothers, it doesn't really matter because for you, any time is right. I'm working off a strategic plan that God has laid out for me, and I have to work on that timetable. That's an amazing thought that Jesus was following a timetable and Jesus was working strategically according to what the Father had opened up for him. And Jesus says to his brothers, well, anytime can be right for you, but for me, the time has to be right. Jesus works from a strategic plan engineered by the Father. And a question I invite you to ask yourself is, what strategic developments has God engineered in my life? And I wish we had time for stories here. I want to get on to this last one. It's really where I want to spend a little bit more time. But have you ever had a setback, an illness, a financial reverse, a disappointment, a broken relationship that seemed like it was ruining everything? And instead, out of that, God brought something, an opportunity to grow a new relationship, a healed relationship, a new opportunity that was strategically set. And it might not have been something that seemed bad at the time. It might have been something very good that you didn't realize how God was engineering things in your life to take you someplace that you never would have been before. It might have been expanding your usefulness. And I've asked two thought questions here. How do I experience the compassion of Jesus today? What strategic developments has God engineered in my life? I haven't given you a lot of time to reflect on that. I would like to give you just a moment before we go on to the edgy picture of Jesus, to just reflect on that. Where do you see God's compassion in your life? And do you see God working strategically now that you can look back over your past? If we had more time, I would ask for some stories, but I'm sorry we don't. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to bring you back to the story at hand. I ask you to circle one other word, and several of you have been curious about the pigs in this story. You're back in Luke 8, verse 32. A large herd of pigs was feeding there. On a nearby hillside, the demons begged Jesus, if you drive us out, send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them. He gave them permission, and the evil spirits came out and went into the pigs. The whole herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Now, let me just ask you, does there seem to be anything edgy about this? Anything that just seems edgy about this and the way that Jesus is acting here to let these 2,000 pigs just be destroyed like that? I mean, this is somebody else's property. Whether you like bacon or not, this is somebody else's property. Anything edgy here? I am inviting responses. Gordon?
Well, you know, this story to me is, I've used this story to try to address the issue of swine and where God puts them, what he expects from us. And to me, the only reason he was willing to do that was because there were Jews involved in raising those pigs, my understanding, and he was sending a message about that.
Okay, that could be. Anybody else? John?
I'll give this a try. It's going to get back to your strategic part, I think. But first of all, when we talk about these things, particularly in response to the edgy, but strategically, I mean, you got to ask yourself, from my military side, to accomplish what?
Yep.
What's your mission here? What are we trying to achieve? A strategy to do what? And without that question being answered, a lot's going to be missing. I believe, in this story. I think they just crossed the lake. I think that the disciples saw something amazing, but they weren't getting it yet. They saw the storm settle down, but they were closer. And then all of a sudden, this person runs out of the graveyard, and the only, besides Jesus, the only entity that understood that was going on right now were those demons. They knew what was going on, and they knew the power that they were confronted with. And Christ exemplified that by sending them into the pigs. Christ didn't send those pigs down the cliff. Those demons went down the cliff. They're the ones that were there. Christ wasn't with them. Christ was there. And then Christ is planting a seed by sending these people out so the disciples someday can maybe get some traction when he's not there to begin this movement. So who's learning something here? Well, strategically, this is a lot for the disciples' benefit.
Yep.
And I look at us as disciples. So what's in this for my benefit?
Mm-hmm.
The edgy part of it, I think, strategically, is that this is tough stuff.
Yeah. I
mean, when we confront bad things, it gets edgy. It takes courage. But I got to ask myself, why am I trying to do this? And I always come back to Christ's last words, and then I'm done, on earth, when he says, go out and make disciples of all people. That is, I am being prepared to do that. Those disciples are being prepared to do that. And I can confront a demon through Christ. I can do it. It isn't easy. It's pretty edgy, frankly. Anyway.
Thanks, John. Let me take off on what John said, and I think I'm going to truncate the number of comments. I'm sorry that I'm talking more. Oh, yes, please, Caitlin.
Well, I had just a quick comment, and then I guess another wrench or a question.
Okay.
First, I see the demons are the ones that drive the pigs into the water, but Jesus is the one that gets blamed for it.
Yeah. Yep.
We do that a lot.
Yep. Yep.
We blame Jesus for the things the devil does.
Yep. Yep.
But then also, I'm thinking, the demons are the ones that ask to go into the pit, and then the demons killed them.
Yep.
And I've always been like, there's something going on here.
Yep.
Why?
Yep.
Why? Or did they die? Like what?
Yeah. Oh, great questions. And we're down to our last 5 minutes, and then I've got 2 more hands up, and then I'm going to probably stop taking hands because there's just a lot here. But let me capitalize on what you're saying. Notice that it's the demons that drive them into the water, and stop and think that was what they had just tried to do to Jesus and the disciples. Yeah. The demons had just tried to drown them in the lake. That's what demons do. That's what the devil does. He is pushing toward destruction. And the ultimate end of this man, if he had not been healed by Jesus, would have been destruction, either in that water or somewhere else. And so the devil is always pushing toward destruction. And now he just showed his full hand of cards, because when he gets to do something on his own, he goes into the pigs and he says, take that. And they're all drowned. So yes, there's a demonic work here, and it's showing where Satan is actually taking things. When he gets in control, he takes them to destruction. Now, I'm going to take the 2 hands that are up, and then I want to wrap up here, and I'm running out of time. But let me take the 2 hands that were up. I think, Keith, you were one of them. Okay, 3 hands. So Keith, and then we'll do Duane. And did we have another hand? You were just pointing out to Keith. Okay, please, go ahead.
I'd like to tie together the 2, edgy and strategic.
Yep.
The people that the man he sent back hadn't been to the seminary, hadn't been ordained, hadn't been to the synagogue, hadn't even been to a Bible study.
Yeah.
maybe our strategy is a little warped. Maybe that the second point would be with the edgy is that this was an event which would give them more strength when they went back to talk to their villagers.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, we'll take two more comments, yours and then Duane's.
So my question is, and it's implied that the demons killed themselves when they drove into the lake. And if you prescribe the fact that Jesus is all-knowing, he probably had a good inclination that was going to happen.
Yep.
So that was strategic in multiple ways, but it was also quite edgy. And you can make the argument that that was a compassionate choice for them.
Yep.
He did to release them from their daily torture on this planet.
Yep. Excellent.
Or maybe they're still alive and just left the pigs to go elsewhere.
Okay, we're going to end with Duane's comment, and then I'm going to wrap this up here. Duane.
I just wanted to dovetail on Gordon's comment. My study Bible made a comment that I thought was pretty interesting, that the Jews normally do not raise pigs because they're considered to be the most unclean of any animal.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, folks, hang on, fasten your seatbelts. We're going to wrap up the last column. I'm going to share my screen with you again, and you tell me if I'm doing it in a way that makes sense. Okay, is it showing up there? Okay, so real quickly, this is not the first time that Jesus had done something that was easy to misunderstand. For Jesus to come into a town and be bad for business the way that he was, and 2,000, that's a big herd of anything. For 2,000 animals, livestock, to just be wiped out like that, and for the town to say, get out of here, we don't want you here, you're bad for business. That was not the first time that Jesus had done something edgy like that. The story of the Syrophoenician woman, we've not studied yet, but it's when Jesus says, no, I'm not going to heal you, you're a dog. Remember that? And Jesus turns that around, but it's an edgy thing for him to do. Or cleansing the temple. That was an edgy thing for to do. Or Jesus eating with sinners. When Jesus did some things that were hard to understand and people would easily misunderstand them, Jesus was taking a risk that people would misinterpret and that people might even say, get out of here. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about that. But let me give you an example here then from the Old Testament. Genesis 50 and verse 20. God doesn't seem to mind edgy things. And at the very end of Joseph's life, he says to his brothers who had sold him into slavery, which was the way that he ended up eventually as the second in command in Egypt, where he had been a slave for so many years. Joseph says to his brothers in verse 20 of Isaiah 50, or Genesis 50, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. That is a way that God works over and over again. And here in this case, the demons intend this for evil. They want to make Jesus so unpopular that he has to get out of town and he can't do any more work there on that side of the lake. And Jesus says, that's okay. This thing is going to turn out for good. And it does, because that story spreads probably more than the story of the demon-possessed men being healed. Did you hear about those 2,000 pigs that ran into the ocean or ran into the lake? And the guy says, yeah, it was on my behalf. Oh, he tells his story. Jesus turned something that the devil threw at him for evil, and he turned it into good. Jesus uses even the forces of evil for our good. And so my question is, where is God turning evil to good in my life? I know we're having to wrap up pretty quickly here. Isaiah 61 says it this way. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me. This is a prophecy about Jesus. Because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. Look at that middle line. What Jesus wants to give us is beauty instead of ashes. Where are you experiencing brokenness, open, bleeding wounds, chains hanging from your arms, aloneness, surrounded by death. Jesus wants to take those ashes and turn them into beauty. In that one man's life, Jesus turned all of those ashes into beauty. And even though it took a little bit longer for that region, he did the same thing for the region. He took all of that loss of livestock and he turned it eventually into beauty. When we get down to that story of the feeding the 4,000 and we see hundreds of people coming to Jesus, thousands of people coming to Jesus, being healed like the man who had told them about Jesus was healed. All of those ashes are turned into beauty. And so we're having to wrap up here pretty quickly. But we've seen three things about Jesus in this story. Jesus is compassionate. Jesus is strategic. And Jesus is edgy, even in the way that he goes about his compassion sometimes, doing things that we don't understand to bring us to a place that is better than we were before, taking those ashes and turning them into beauty. That's what he wants to do for us. Ken, I'll turn it back over to you.
First, I want to ask, where is Andrew or Nina Waco here today? Andrew and Nina, I don't think you are. If you are, please see me. So what does this great story mean to you? This great teacher that just helped me so much. What do you take out of here today? My biggest problem of moving my office downtown 6 years ago has been the homeless. They've been there, but now they're getting aggressive. We're trying to grope the ladies in our office. We have police on speed dial. We have police that we hire, off-duty policemen, full-time now. So when they came to me yesterday and told me about a couple of them trying to grope some of the ladies, I said to myself, you don't need any police. I'll handle it. There's a baseball bat by my back door. I'm going to bring it Monday. I don't want anybody in my way. We'll get some of our orthopedic surgeons that they will go with replacing kneecaps. I know them, and we'll get this fixed. But then today we have the store. Wouldn't it be great if those people like screaming and yelling and talking to themselves and throwing whiskey bottles and looking into plate glass mirrors like they're talking to themselves and they think it's another person on the other side? Wouldn't it be great if some way I could find a way to transform Pastor Mike, who's well known for groping women in Chattanooga? Wouldn't it be great if there was a way to somehow reach through that facade and find that person in there? Wouldn't it be great if you could to tell that person, go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you? Wouldn't that be great? So the evil Ken will not take his baseball bat to work Monday. I'll be thinking about this story. Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Another matter. Mary, would you have our prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you that we come together as a group today to study your word as we go through this following week. Dear Lord, I pray that we will, the things that we've learned today, that we will be able to apply in our lives. So we thank you that we can come together today. Amen.
Thank you, Doug.